Good afternoon. My name is David Hershey. I'm the current chair of the Utah Land Use Institute. I'm grateful for all of you being here today. We're in for a treat this afternoon, some education as well as some opportunities to discuss important issues. This conference has been planned and organized by the Board of Directors of the Utah Land Use Institute. I'm assisted by Jody Hoffman and Mike Ostermiller, our vice chairs, and our board members are Brent Bateman, Wade Budge, Nicole Cottle, Gary Crane, Chris Nelson, David Thomas, Meg Ryan, Steve Waldrop, and Wolf Summercorn. And of course, the real power behind the conference, as always, is our executive director, Craig Call, and our Deputy Executive Director, Wolf Summercorn. And we're grateful for their putting this together and for their guidance as we look forward to this fall conference each year. We also want to acknowledge Jonathan Call, who's our Program Director, and our staff, Janine Call and Doug Larson, for their tireless efforts in helping us put this program together. Please join me in giving thanks to these folks for their efforts. Of course, this conference would not be possible without the continued sponsorship of our sponsors. We're so grateful for them and for the support that they give the Institute. Our sponsors this year are the S.J. and Jesse E. Quinney Foundation, the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman, Utah Department of Commerce, Salt Lake County, and Piper Sandler. And I might just mention the sponsorship of Piper Sandler allowed for it to be possible for some city officials and students to attend this conference with a lowered tuition. And so we're very grateful for their support. Our Institute partners are the Utah League of Cities and Towns, the Utah Association of Realtors, Salt Lake Association of Realtors, the Home Builders of Utah, the Real Property Section of the Utah State Bar, and the Utah chapter of the American Planning Association. Please join me in thanking our sponsors. Just a few housekeeping items. In case of emergency, exits are at the back and the front. Restrooms are located in the lobby area of the building. And in the foyer, as you entered the room, there are materials that you should have picked up. We also have our little bling badges that you can pick up. There are also sign-up sheets for continuing education for those of you seeking credit. Please be sure and sign those each day of the conference. We are going to open up some of the time this afternoon and tomorrow for questions and answers. In order to allow for the transmission of your questions through our audio and video links, it will be necessary for you to have a mic. So please wait for a mic before you ask your questions. So that we can be sure and be able to share that with those who are joining us remotely. Finally, we're grateful for all of our speakers and moderators for their willingness and expertise. Please note that bios for all of our speakers are contained in the materials that you have with you this morning or this afternoon. So at this point, I'll turn the time over to Wolf Summercorn, who will introduce this afternoon's session. Thank you.
Well, thank you, David. And thanks all for being here. We are looking forward to some interesting stuff. My name is Wolf Summercorn. For those of you who don't know me, I was a longtime planner who is in the stages of recovering from that. I retired about 5 years ago. If you ask my wife, is he really retired? She'll say it's a big fat lie. I keep working with Utah EPA as a legislative person and then also working with the Land Use Institute with Craig and helping to do these conferences and a number of other things that we've been doing. So kind of staying involved there. Joined today in this Tuesday afternoon session with a couple of great experts, attorneys. I am going to be one of the few non-attorneys you're going to see at this conference, or at least hear from. So you really ought to pay attention to me and not so much to these guys, because, you know, they're always giving you the legal perspective on things. But no, actually, these are great guys. Let me introduce them. Brent Bateman, who in a past life was the state property rights ombudsman, followed in the footsteps of Craig Call, who pioneered that position, but then Brent took it to further and greater heights, and then he left and became a private practice attorney, and now works for the dark side. And he loves it. He tells me that all the time. Brent will be leading us in a lot of this in the discussion, and will do a good job. Todd Godfrey. Todd Godfrey is also an attorney, not quite so much on the dark side. Yeah. Todd works for, and your firm's name escapes me. Hayes Godfrey Bell. There we go. But more notably, Todd is also of counsel, legal counsel to the League of Cities and Towns, and works with a number of communities directly, at giving them legal advice and legal guidance. And our session today is going to be about, as portrayed on the slides, myth busting, things that people think and believe. And let me kind of set the stage here a little bit with a piece from something that appeared in the news media just in the last few days. This appeared on KSL. Now, I am going to exercise the name of the community and the names of the individuals involved, because I don't want to blame them directly, and I'm not blaming them directly. I'm using this as an example of what we see in a number of places around the state, and some of the issues that we face because of the kinds of myths or misunderstandings that we have about land use and development and how things work. Let me just kind of read from this real quick for you and give you a sense of this. Some of you may have heard this and may be aware. Some of you will probably know the community. And first of all, if you are from this community or you are aware of this, I'm not trying to hammer this community. I'm just trying to use it as an example, but I'll get blamed for that anyway. So, I'll hammer. Yep. Home builders stood at the podium in stunned silence, listening to the city council one by one deny their request to rezone a vacant 4-acre lot for a new housing development. The reason given for the motion, so that we can move forward with our lives, was proposed by a council person, a culmination of a series of tense meetings between developers, engineers, and the council. A long-awaited zoning approval was complicated by the fact that a councilman and the mayor lived in the bordering housing development. As private citizens, they had spoken out against the new development, and public record requests showed that they had texted their neighbors to do the same. The council dismissed engineering reports showing that the building on the property would have no impact and would likely improve the flooding and draining issues that the area has experienced in the past. The purchase by the developers of the property was contingent upon a zoning approval that would allow them to build a continuation of the adjacent housing subdivision, a quiet and bright neighborhood. But we like what you guys build, we do, if that means anything, said one of the council members. But the developer responded, just not in your backyard. That's not fair, the council member responded. Sorry for the delays, the pause, I got to get at the right pages here. All right. Owners of the property say their positive relationship with the city took a turn for the worse when they were approached and asked to donate their property as a park. They declined to donate the land, instead offering to sell it to the city, but no offer was ever made. After the rezone was denied, the builders were released from their contract with the owners. The developer sent an email to the owners saying the city council is not being truthful in their arguments for not approving this development. We believe that they have personal interests in clouding their judgment because this is right in the backyard of one of the council members and the mayor. A former planning commission member and a real estate agent, after the planning commission had recommended approval of the rezone, said at a September meeting, "I've watched you guys approve developments and I've never seen you guys make these guys jump through the hoops. Make these guys jump through hoops like you have these guys." The owners filed a lawsuit against the city and some of the council members, alleging the rezone denial was improper. But it was, what do you think happened? Dismissed by the courts. Why would that happen? Well, this kind of just sets the ground, I think, a little bit for some of the things we want to talk about today. The understandings and misunderstandings that people have about land use, about the processes, about how things work, about how development works, and how things might proceed forward. So, with that, I'm going to throw it over to Brent. Brent has kind of taken on the format that he has used successfully in the past in some presentations, and he'll guide us through that. We are set up here kind of in a semicircle because we want this to be an open discussion with all of you. So we want to engage you in the conversation that we're going to have. We'll certainly chime in with what we know and can suggest about some of these issues and things that we're going to talk about, but we want to hear from you as well and get you involved in that conversation. So, Brent.
Thanks, Will. Hey, everyone. It's great to see you. So what we're going to do today, we're going to try to make this fun and interesting. But the whole point of this is to try to dispel myths that are commonly held. And we have created quite a list here of myths that are commonly held. This article that came out in the newspaper yesterday from KSL yesterday illustrates really firmly that a lot of these myths are still commonly held. And we're going to try to straighten these out today. We have a list of 36 items, right? 36 myths that we thought of that we want to try to get through. We want to try to get to the truth of. We do not expect to get to all of them, even close. And matter of fact, we're hoping that you will think of some myths that will engender some discussion about whether or not it's true or that myth is busted. So just really quickly to show you what we've got here, okay? We've divided the myths into 3 categories right here. Local government myths, developer myths, and neighbor myths. And as you'll see here, we've got different lists of myths for all those categories. Some of this is going to be basic land use. And there are people here who could use some basic land use discussion. Some of it, and I think actually most of it, is actually going to be pretty advanced land use. And so that's why we're hoping to talk about this and to get into something that's deeper than what's normal. What we're going to do is we're going to let you guys pick which of the subjects you guys want to talk about. Anything that you see up on the list that looks interesting to you or whatever that you might have a comment about, and we'll just have a conversation about it. But the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure to say this, okay? We've been doing these conferences at the Utah Land Use Institute for a long, long time. And some of you, I look out in the audience, and I know some of you have been coming for a long, long time. But I know a lot of you, maybe this is your first or second one. Just want to make sure you understand this is always a safe space. There are developers here. There are city people here. There are elected officials here. There are planners here. There are attorneys here, right? And one thing that we should never be afraid of is being judged or ridiculed or starting some kind of debate or promise. This is our opportunity to get together. It's golden, and hear from each other. And after we leave here tonight, we can go and we can fight all we want, and we can hate each other again. But while we're here, we don't hate each other. Hard to take sometimes, isn't it? Also, while we're here, there is no question, there is no comment, there is no fact that we're going to talk about that's too basic, okay? We want you to walk out of here feeling like you understand something better, right? So if there's something that you'd like to talk about, if it's something you'd like to explore further, even though everyone else in the room you think might already know this principle, we are happy to discuss it with you. So you want to make sure you understand that. Any questions about that? Okay, now with that information, I have the following list of people who are here who have to leave because they're not going to be a safe space. No, just kidding. Okay, so we have these three things. We're going to go to different things over the course of the afternoon. But the first question is, where do you want to start? Local government. Sounds great. Here are the local government myths. I'm going to sit down and ask you guys to tell us which of those you want to talk about first. And here we go.
Now this means you guys have to really get engaged here. So no just sitting on your hands and being passive. Tell us which one of those things you want to talk about. Somebody give us the first one to start with. Aha, okay. Impact fees are the answer. Todd, you want to take that?
Yeah, it depends on the question, right? We've had a love-hate relationship in the state with impact fees for a long time. I will tell you, I was just starting into my law practice when the state codified the Impact Fees Act. From a historical perspective, we're still relatively new in our state with a regulated impact fee, but obviously we know prior to the enactment of our Impact Fees Act, which was in 95, Wilf, is that right?
Yeah, about that.
In 95, there were species of impact fees being charged by municipalities, local government. They may not have been titled that way, but they were in fact, fees related to the impact of development, hopefully related to the impact of development. Impact fees in a lot of cases definitely can be an answer to infrastructure challenges. They are not always the answer to infrastructure challenges. And what I see from my side of the practice representing local government frequently is that the jump to the assessment of an impact fee isn't always as well thought out as I would like it to be. I'd like there to be a little more thought and consideration into the circumstances where you use the impact fee and is it appropriate. In a fast growth community that has a lot of greenfield property, I think you need an impact fee structure. I think it's terribly important. I also think you need to be ready to acknowledge the reality of what we legally can and should require the development community to pay for, and what needs to be, what I would call a burden that is spread more broadly than the single developer who's appearing before you, right? I don't know that we have reached a thought process yet in this state where we understand that kind of dividing line. And it is absolutely the truth that developers will look at a particular structural improvement or public improvement and say, that's serving more than me, that's therefore a system improvement and the whole public should pay for it. And a city will look at the exact same piece of infrastructure and say, that's what you would be required to build for your project anyway. That's not a system improvement, it's a project improvement. Our law allows us to resolve those disputes in amicable and decent ways. Sometimes those amicable and decent ways look like a lawsuit, and we don't think those two things are coextensive. They are. But as a general rule, I think they can be an answer. And I think they have obviously more application in our high growth, heavy greenfield type communities. I represent a couple of very high growth communities and a couple of really established cities that don't have really any significant open space left for development. In that, established city, impact fees are very rarely the answer. They're almost never the answer. But in the large growth communities, they are.
David Church used to say to me that he would advise his clients whether or not to do impact fees depends on how many building permit applications you get. If you don't get many, he used to advise them to not do impact fees.
If your development pace is really, really slow, your impact fees aren't going to fund anything, right? I mean, and with our spend or encumber requirement of 6 years on the collection of impact fees, that's a difficulty in a really, really slow growth community. I don't know how many really, really slow growth communities we have left anymore. It's hitting everywhere, but I think they are at times absolutely an answer.
Well, so, but to something you said before, I just want to say that a lot of times I've heard people say, we need revenue. We don't want to raise taxes, or impact fee is the way to do that.
Revenue for what? Right?
For life, right?
Yeah, and impact fees can only be used for the construction of the public improvements for which we're authorized to charge them. So you can't run the city on impact fees. You can't pay your city manager and your planner and your engineer for their day-to-day activities out of impact fees. There's a very small part of their tasks that you could ever charge to an impact fee. So they're an answer to build some public infrastructure.
So I remember the days when I started out in planning, there was nothing in the state code, or very little, about impact fees, almost nothing. And I remember, their impact fees were not a really big thing, but that was because, as both Todd and Brent have mentioned, growth wasn't really, it was just starting to take off, just really starting to get going. And, if you have slow growth or hardly any growth, what you charge normally in your taxes and so on can help to finance whatever infrastructure you may need. But when growth really gets going, and you've got to come up with a bunch of money up front to fund that infrastructure, then impact fees was a way to do it. Well, before there was really any guidance on impact fees, I remember this happening so many times that a community would say, man, we got to build more water lines, and we got to build a sewer system, and we got to do some things, and we need some money to do that. Apparently we can do that with these things called impact fees. How do we charge impact fees? I don't know. Let's take a look at what the community next to us is charging. Oh yeah, they're charging this? Okay, we'll charge that too. And that's what they would base their impact fees on. Well, that kind of a system pretty quickly led to the development community saying, hey, wait a minute, this isn't really fair, because you're charging a lot of stuff to our development that may or may not be appropriate. And so pretty soon we started getting stuff showing up, as Todd mentioned, in about 1995. We started getting language in the state code with regard to impact fees. And now when you take a look at the state code, there's a lot of stuff in there on impact fees. A lot of rules that you need to follow and a lot of things that you need to be aware of. And, it's still, all the problems aren't solved. We still have, I think, issues with many of our communities, because one of the rules says when you charge an impact fee, you got to use it within 6 years. I think there's still, some circumstances happening where those fees, that money isn't being used within the 6 years, just because of the way things work, the timing and the financing and everything else that goes on. And so what does that mean? And there's ongoing discussion about impact fees. Impact fees work well when you've got the growth and when you can create the solution, do the engineering, do the studies, the work of what needs to be done, and then pretty much hold to it. But a lot of times you've decided what you want your infrastructure to look like, and here comes a development proposal that completely blows your plan out of the water. And so now what do you do? So sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it doesn't. It's really circumstantial.
Let me say one more thing. Wilf mentioned you have to spend those impact fees within 6 years. Technically, under the law, you have to spend or encumber your collected impact fees within 6 years. There's a lot that could go into that spend or encumber idea in the law. So talk to your city and town attorneys about what that means. We have to be making lawful use of the impact fees we collect, or we have to be refunding them. That 6 years is not always a strict 6-year window, but there is a spend or encumber requirement within 6 years.
Any follow-up questions to that?
All right, to repeat the question, what if the impact fees are being used for what appears to be trying to control growth? Limit it? Or is that what you're saying? Kind of like slow it down, maybe not make it happen or happen very slowly?
There's a pretty strict limit in our state law about how you can calculate the impact fee and what can be included in that calculation, what you can use the impact fees to pay for. So when you say they're using the impact fees to slow or limit growth, I'm envisioning in my mind that they're imposing a really, really high impact fee. If that impact fee is not based on and calculated within the requirements of Utah law, a developer is entitled to bring a lawsuit against the city and recover the difference between what the impact fee should have been and what the impact fee was. There's an additional kicker in the state law right now that provides that if they seek an ombudsman opinion on the impact fee and they get a decision from the ombudsman that is favorable to the developer and the city or town insists on pursuing their impact fee at their level, that a court can also award attorney's fees to a developer. I hope that's a significant deterrent as you're thinking about these things. It should be. Impact fee litigation is going to be based on a lot of expert opinion. It's going to be complicated. It is, in my opinion, almost always going to take something more than a summary judgment motion, a decision based on just the paper pleadings. It's going to be expensive litigation. And in my opinion, the law is quite clear about what can be included in an impact fee and how you can calculate it. And even with that clarity that I think exists, I still have disputes sometimes with developers about what it means and what it is. There are ways to resolve those short of litigation that saves both parties time and expense and money. But I don't think they are an effective tool to limit or control growth. And if you're looking to limit or control growth, I would suggest lots of other methods to you besides an impact fee.
So I want to respond to that. I agree with everything that Todd just said, except for, have you ever tried to audit an impact fee?
Yeah, I've lived through the audit of the
I know,
impact fee.
I know you have.
Yes.
It's tough. And one of the reasons why it's tough is because it has to be based on data. The data is not always in the impact fee facilities plan, and so you have to dig deeper to get the data. And it turns out the data is self-reported by the city. And so you have to dig deeper to find out how they got that data. And sometimes they just got it just from nowhere, you know? And so you get somebody with an impact fee that's unusually high, and you want to dig in and find out why it's so high. You know, you have a requirement, you know, your impact fees are double what the three towns next to you all are. That doesn't prove anything.
Nope.
But why? Try to get in there and find out why. And so what I think what you're saying, yeah, there's protections in place. They're not always accessible, those protections.
I agree with that. There's no question they're not always there. But I will also tell you the impact fee bar in this state is sophisticated. They're good. They know how to dig into the numbers very, very well. There are, I mean, I've seen the challenges. I've litigated some of them. The bar here is sophisticated, and you will not, I'll just tell communities right now, you will not get away with a baseless impact fee analysis and study. It won't sell. And the other thing that is just kind of an inevitable thing.
It might sell for a while. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it could
might
sell for a while. But it won't benefit you because you can't spend the impact fees for anything but to build the improvement. And if you're over collecting, you're going to build surplus balances that you'll never be able to use. And that, to me, actually is one of the telltale signs. If you've got an impact fee fund balance and you've built your projects, something's wrong. Especially in an escalating construction cost market, something's wrong.
So this is going to be the advantage of being the old guy up here. I remember one way that growth, communities sort of controlled or tried to control or limit growth was, for example, I would see a developer come in and say, I want to build a housing development or some kind of development on this property right here. And the city would say, Well, that's great, but we don't have any services to that area yet. We don't have any water there. We need a water tank. We need a water system. We probably need some major sewer lines and other things. And we don't have the money to build them. So if you want to develop it, pay for it. And the developer would say, I can't afford to build a whole water tank and a sewer system like that. And the city would say, well, then, you're not going to build. And that was a way to limit growth. Some developers, what they would do is that they would then say, I'll build it, city, if you'll agree as development occurs to pay me back. And we called them pioneering agreements. And so we would see some of that happen, but then the cities got into a situation of saying, how are we going to collect the money to pay him back? And so that's when they would have to start implementing impact fees. And it all just kind of depended on the philosophy of the community, how they wanted to approach it.
That has nothing to do with you being old, Will. That happens every day.
Still happening?
Still happens every day.
Really?
Concurrency is still a valuable tool.
Yeah.
Well, there's no question, and there's no question that, if you're going to pioneer, you need to pioneer. And the way we're paying for those right now is by impact fees. It's still not a perfect system, still not a perfect way to get people reimbursed. But the cities are never going to open checkbooks to pay for any of those things, ever.
It shouldn't.
Well, you say they shouldn't, but I'm not sure I agree with that.
Brent and I will disagree a lot today.
Yes, we
We're
will.
setting the ground rules right now.
But we are good friends, so it doesn't matter.
We have two over here, so.
Just one follow-up. It seems like there's some confusion at times.
And they're generally, the question was, there's some confusion in the state about a developer who comes in and wants to develop and has to build significant infrastructure to get to his property. The city requires the construction of the infrastructure, and then when the developer says, I want to be paid back for some of that, the city says, no, I'm sorry, that's your obligation if you want to develop. Did I characterize that correctly?
Double check.
Yeah, and a developer saying we shouldn't have to pay impact fees if we build the infrastructure. Generally true. I would support that with one qualification. A developer has to answer their impact, whatever that may be. And when we take something from them, whether it's through a development exaction that's traditional, that looks like the dedication of property, the construction of an improvement, or an impact fee that is beyond their impact, that's an unlawful exaction. So, if a developer needs to extend a roadway a long ways to get to their property, in my opinion, the smallest local roadway they need to answer their impact to get to their project should be on their nickel. But if they have to oversize a pipe beyond what their impact is, the marginal cost of the pipe size they need to the pipe size you're requiring them to install, they should be reimbursed for. If you require that road to be a greater width than what they need for their impact, you need to pay for the additional width. And that doesn't just mean the construction, that means the dirt underneath the road also. We have for years and years and years in this state, on the good graces of the development community, gotten a lot of free property for roadways because we've convinced them that we'll pay you the marginal construction cost for building more road, but we've refused to pay for the dirt. Legally, technically, we were obligated to pay for the dirt too. So there's two parts to that, right? Yes, they need to extend their infrastructure and they shouldn't be charged an impact fee. It should be an offset for what they've had to build that is greater than their impact.
We agree on that point.
Question there, yeah.
Great question.
Nope. So she asked if there's a way to, if we can clarify how you encumber impact fee proceeds so they're spent or encumbered within 6 years. So many different communities do it so many different ways, and so many communities say there's a note in the city council minutes that say we're going to use that money to build this. That's not enough. I think you need some formal process to encumber the funds, and there actually is a definition in the state code for spend or encumber. It's pretty tight. It requires, you know, some formal action. So I can't give you a detail on this is what it means. There's a range of things it could mean, but I'm always advising my clients, if you're trying to show that you have allocating an impact fee to a project within the 6-year period, I don't want a capital facilities plan that goes out another 6 years to be the basis for the spend and encumber in the initial 6 years. I don't think that's good enough. I want something formal from my council that says we are planning to build this in, you know, a really close budget cycle. It's got to be something really pretty formal, and please don't try and extend that out, you know, 2 or 3 years beyond the 6. It just creates that big cloud over all of it. If we're going to keep operating under the statutory system we have now, we have to operate under that system in good faith. And there are lots of ways we can sort of extend these things, and I don't think we ought to be looking for those. I think we ought to be looking to faithfully spend the funds we collect.
I know encumber when I see it.
I thought that too, but I'm not sure anymore.
Well, I know what encumber, one thing that is encumbering is having a debt.
A contract.
Yeah. And so that's the way to be safe, in my opinion.
As a county commissioner or a land or planning commissioner, should we be auditing the capital accounts for these impact fees?
I don't think planning commissioners should ever be auditing any accounts. I think county commissioners, city council members, and everybody else should be having those accounts audited. I think it's important that you look at those. There are, I would not call them frequent, but there are occasional audits that come down from the state level that look at those things. Your outside auditors should be looking at all those accounts. Yeah, they should be reviewed very regularly. When any public money should be scrutinized at a regular level and at a high level, right? Impact fees are a restricted fee account. You can only use them for very certain purposes. So, yeah, they should be audited.
Well, that went well, Brent. We've gotten through one category, and we'll get through all of them at this rate, right?
Yes, we will.
All right. We ready to move on? What else? What's the next thing somebody would like to talk about? Our developers, the dark side.
So, having used to be the ombudsman and now being a developer's attorney, I've been accused of coming to the dark side a lot. And I'm going to argue right now that I am not on the dark side. So, nerds in the room, tell me what is the main characteristic of someone who's on the dark side? Deals in absolutes. They wear black. So, to me, the main characteristic of someone on the dark side is someone who needs a Bill of Rights to protect people from their grabs for power. So here's how I look at it for reals, okay? There's a certain amount of tension between developers and local governments, and I think that tension is actually probably a good thing as long as it doesn't get out of hand, because it results in a better product, okay? But intentionally, in this country, we have chosen to privatize some government responsibilities. We privatize those. Some things that the government does, we have private industry do that. And growth and development of your city is one of those things. We have elected to privatize that. We have elected to allow developers, to ask developers, sometimes force, to build our cities, to handle our growth, to build our roads, to build our infrastructure. We have privatized that. Yet at the same time, developers get demonized. It's exactly the right word. They get demonized for being greedy. They get demonized for making money at all. I was recently in a meeting with the city where they were talking about ways to do it more affordable housing. And after figuring it all out and everyone having a big group hug, the city council turned to the developer and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we forgot one thing. Where's the part where you give the massive discount on these houses and build them for cost?" They literally thought that's how this was going to work. They thought we're going to build the same houses on the same lots and everything, but we're going to make them affordable by making the developers not make money. And you know what? We live in America. We're capitalists. We like capitalists. Capitalists are what drive our economy forward. Okay? I was in another meeting last week with one of my client development companies, and it was a meeting with all of their contractors and subcontractors and affiliates and stuff like that. And what was very clear is there was about 400 or 500 people in that room whose entire lives were dependent on that developer building houses. So how's that the dark side? We're driving the economy. We're building your city. We are the ones, I mean, you know, that certain tension is there for sure, okay? But we're not the ones who need a Bill of Rights to keep them from abusing power. Response.
Don't need a Bill of Rights, but they do need a set of ordinances to guide them and rein them in sometimes, right? I don't like the dark side characteristic. I don't like that. I talk about black hats, not the dark side. So I like old westerns.
So different.
I have run into so many really, really, truly high quality builders, developers, you know, and I tell newly elected officials all the time that their primary goal actually isn't to pass ordinances and regulate, it's to figure out how to build a community. And that means not just the built environment, but creating the environment people live in too, right? But we don't create the built environment very often on the city side. I mean, you get an RDA project here or there, you get a city that finds a piece of property somehow in their hands that they create the development for. That is the one-off, and it's really rare and exceptional. The development community does build the built community. That's the truth. And our ordinances are supposed to guide that, and they're supposed to sort of constrain it in some ways, but we don't build it. And I have seen so many truly high-quality builders and developers do fabulous things, and I have seen the one-off where somebody is trying to build something and cut a corner and not do it right, and I've seen that create public safety issues. So there is a balance to all this. I work really, really hard in my practice to not let my clients think of developers as the dark side. I think that's the wrong way to view the whole land use regulation process. I don't think it's productive. I don't think it builds the best projects. I think it's a mistake to view it that way. As cities and towns, we do have an obligation to protect the public health and safety, and our ordinance structures really should do that the best way we can. But until I've had experience with somebody that shows me they're not trying to act in the best way, they're not the dark side. There isn't, in my mind, a dark side. It is absolutely true that if you're a public official, if you're a city employee, you are the government which the Constitution protects the people from. That's the truth. There's no question. We did find Brent's hot button when we called him the dark side. We all saw that. But I don't think it's productive to think of the land use process in that way at all. When somebody walks in your door and they have a piece of property and they want to do something with it, whether it's the guy who owns a half an acre and wants to build 1 or 2 houses, or today 4 or 5 houses, or whether it's somebody coming in with, 500 acres and they want to do a huge project, we need to look at that as these are the people. Brent talked too much. we need to look at that as these are the people who are building our built community that we're all going to live in.
So I want to add to that. Thank you, Todd. I want to add to that that there are bad developers out there. There's plenty. And the bad things they do make my good developer clients suffer. But the flip side is true. And I know you guys know this. The fact that you're here means you're probably, trying to do it right. But there's plenty of local government folks out there who are not. And I would say that the numbers on those things are about equal. There's problems on the one side, problems on the other side, but no one is escaping, reasons to have the finger point at them. I don't think.
And being on the planner side, I agree with what both of them have said. But Brent just mentioned, he said there are some bad actors out there, and unfortunately, they kind of color what happens in some ways really strongly. In some communities, you see examples where homes start sliding down hillsides. Now that may just be the circumstance of the geology and nobody really could have foreseen that. But in other cases, somebody says, hey, if you'd done a little better investigation, we would have known that. And you didn't want to do that because you didn't want to spend the money. And so you kind of color the aspect of what's going on and how it all came about, or maybe traffic situations or so on. And what I've seen happen a lot of times is that those bad examples prompt some people to run for office and say, we're never going to let that happen again in our community. And then they do kind of tend to see all developers as being on the dark side. And so that's it's human nature. It's kind of, we need to understand it, but I think, there's a balance there, and we need to recognize there's a balance. And there's good and there's bad. I think generally there's more good than bad, but there is some bad out there, and it tends to color sometimes what happens.
This isn't anything about my law practice, my advice to my clients, or anything else, but we hear anecdotes about bad projects, things that have gone bad, all the things that the story Wilf read at the start of our presentation today. I think the best news reporter doing their very, very best work and trying to get to the bottom of everything probably writes a story understanding, in the best case, maybe 2/3 of the information that's out there, right? And I also think sometimes where there's a lot of smoke, there's usually fire. We're balancing those things as municipalities when we're doing the land use regulation game. We're looking at all those things. But the fact is, our role requires us, to a large extent, to accept information we get from professionals and to move forward based on that. If your ordinances allow you to get to the right information, you're in a good place.
All right, any follow-ups to that?
I can talk about it all day. So about, Cam, 2005, 2006,
Repeat the question.
the question was, can we talk a little bit about ULCT and the relationship with developers? About 2005 or 2006, the President of the Senate had had enough with land use regulation in this state and the way it felt to him. And he brought forward a bill at the beginning of the session that would have essentially stripped cities and towns of their land use regulation rights.
Nuclear option.
It was the nuclear option. And you can imagine the reaction from cities and towns, right? It was really powerful and really strong. And Greg Bell at that time was a state senator. Greg was the former mayor of Farmington City, so he'd been a local elected official. He became the lieutenant governor of the state at some point after this, but he looked at the situation of the way sort of land use was being approached in the state, and the fights we were having at the legislature every year on land use issues. And he actually, and Gary, if I've got this wrong, let me know, but I think by his own impetus, sort of, he organized the land use task force. And he took a group from the Property Rights Coalition developers and the Realtors Association and from local government, and he said, we're going to sit in a room and we're going to review legislation before every session, and we're going to work to get these things right. And he was the adult in the room in those early years, kind of supervising that whole process, and it has developed now to where it's a consistent thing. The Land Use Task Force is a thing. And the Land Use Task Force in this state is comprised of, and generally spearheaded by the League of Cities and Towns and the Property Rights Coalition. And they meet year-round to talk about land use issues in the state.
Just had a meeting this morning.
We did just meet this morning. And I was on the outside looking in at the Land Use Task Force from 2005 or 6 to Cam 2020? 19. I forget how long I've been talking to Cam about Land Use Task Force things. I was on the outside looking in. And there were times from my seat when I looked at things that happened in the legislature, and I had the definite opinion that the league caved to the developers, just like it says on there. I definitely had that impression from time to time. And as I would dive into those things and look at them, what I actually believe happened is that the legislative pressure to do something forced a compromise that looked to me on the face initially to be bad. And over time, I've developed a different opinion about that process. There are times when that land use task force process produces a result for local government that I can characterize as not great. That has happened. I also think there are times in that process where it's created a result for the development community that is not great. I think that happens also. What we're trying to get to through that process is good legal policy. Is it changing the way cities and towns do business? Yes, it is. And is it requiring cities to make sometimes really significant changes in their processes? Yes, it is. And that is really difficult sometimes to stomach and to accept. And sometimes it's really hard to administer and to implement. What I will say about what happens at the Land Use Task Force right now is that there is tremendous pressure at the state level to do a lot of things relating to housing and development processes and the way we look at things. I do not believe in the last 5 years that I have ever seen the League of Cities and Towns cave on a development issue. Have there been things happen at the legislature that were contrary to what we wanted? Yes, there have been. But I've never seen the League cave to pressure from developers.
Yeah, so I can address this as a past league president and a mayor. For better or for worse, we have legislators that come up with ideas about how to improve the legal framework around land use and all kinds of things every year. And some of those ideas are harebrained. Some of them have unintended consequences. Apologies to any legislators that are here. But the one thing about the Land Use Task Force and the other groups that the state has formed, there's the Commission on Housing Affordability and some other boards and commissions, is that they get stakeholders together to talk about these issues in advance of the session, and a lot of the bad ideas get weeded out. Are there compromises made? You betcha, right? And if we all are honest about this, some of the best things that government does are compromises, right? You're balancing things, you're trying to address a problem but not go overboard. So does the league cave? Sometimes it has to. You see the writing on the wall, okay? If you're gonna beat your head against a brick wall, yeah, you try to shape that policy to the extent that you can to improve it, okay? But the league fights really hard for the things that we believe in, which is really to balance the health and safety and welfare of the people in Utah against development, and development is good, okay? I'm a mayor that supports development in my city. As has been said, you guys build our communities. Cities don't build things, you guys do. And the best outcomes we have are when we collaborate and when we build things according to a plan.
Mayor, identify yourself, if you would.
I'm Jeff Silvestrini, I'm the mayor of Mill Creek.
Thank you. Again, being the old guy here, I mean, I've been involved in the land use task force from the very beginning. And we talk about, you know, the league caving, or the perception that the league has caved on land use issues at the legislative level. But I can tell you, I've been in those land use task force meetings numerous times where the development community has said, well, the league got their way again. So it kind of works both ways. It really does. And that's really how it should be, that you kind of get a compromise and things working both ways. And usually you'll wind up someplace in the middle that's acceptable to both, and probably a better solution.
I've been a part of the land use task force for a long time, not as long as Wilf, but coming on to 20 years, I think, or 15. And the league does not cave. I'm just telling you that. There are compromises that happen. In my, you know, Todd and I would disagree on this, but in my perspective, the league gets its way more than developers do. But the league does not cave. It's always a bloody sausage, a making of sausage, you know, that old saying. It's always that way.
Any other follow-ups to that? We ready to move on to another topic? All right, somebody pick us a topic. Bill? Oh, yeah, sure, go ahead. Well, hang on. Craig's going to bring you a mic.
I do tend to talk loud anyway, so.
This is for the online folks.
Okay,
so they
thank
can
you,
hear
online folks. How you doing? So the question is, given the current environment of animosity between local government and the development community, what meaningful steps can we take to overcome the friction that exists between property rights and government interference? What I'm really looking forward to, and this is more of a philosophical question maybe, and maybe even beyond the scope of, I don't know, anything we could discuss in a very long meeting. What can we do to heal some of these wounds? What can we do to work together? Because we do, as the mayor pointed out, we do always get a better product when we work together. We get better outcomes. There's less animosity. There's less of the friction that often develops. I really like the master development agreement process, because I feel like things are vetted through and we develop relationships, and it's a collaborative thing, and it's wonderful. But there's still this underlying current of the state's going to step in and take away our ability to do anything, and the local governments push back against that, and the league caves to developers, or doesn't cave to developers, or whatever the league does. You know, how do we heal all this? It feels like it's just too much animosity for siblings that should be getting along better.
Well, I'll give you my quick take on this, my perspective, and then I'll throw it to these two guys. My perspective is there's not really a lot of animosity there between the two sides. There's tension, there's disagreements, there's, trying to work through some things, but I don't really feel like there's real, gut level animosity. When Todd mentioned what happened in 2005, there was animosity. Man, that was animosity. But I don't sense that, it's not that way now. It's by working through that. I mean, you see what's happening in some other states where you have a lot of top-down solutions that are coming that are really kind of perceived to be favorable to the development community. A lot of the comment, Utah has really gotten recognition for having a good collaborative effort between the two sides. Now, having said that, a lot of the legislation that has occurred in the last couple of years has kind of been pointed out to be things where both the local government side and the development side could agree on points, but a legislator did recently make a comment, maybe we've done all of the stuff we can agree on, and now we got to start doing stuff we don't agree on. And that may be the case. We'll see what happens. But that's kind of my perspective on it. I think it's not bad. certainly not bad compared to what it has been in the past. And we're always going to have a little bit of that there somewhere. I think it's just part of the nature of it and makes for better outcomes.
I mean, the big picture philosophy is hard. We have a divided society, and maybe what's happening in this development scenario with the housing crisis we're in and everything else is a little microcosm or a shadow of that. But I always tell my clients to take emotion out of the process and to live within their ordinance structures in the state law. That's the way I always advise my clients, to take the emotion out and live within your ordinances, right? You understand what they are. You are bound by them. You're obligated to follow them. Live within your ordinances. If your ordinances aren't producing the results you want, change your ordinances. You can do that too. But by the same token, I have heard the best counsel for developers who invest a ton and spend a lot of money just to make application to a city say to their clients, you have to live within the structure also, right? So I know developers would like to see it if there weren't such a thing as local land use regulation. That would make their life better. There is. That's the process now. The city you're coming into has a set of ordinances. There's a process to change those if you want to. You may not get what you want, but there's a process to ask and push it through. Live within the process on both sides. From the city side, I think we have an obligation to take emotion out of it, really, because we're obligated to live with our ordinances. You know, the zone change question, that legislative discretion thing, it's a big issue, and we're supposed to hear from our constituents on those issues. Those are the things that the emotion gets high. We can't live totally outside the emotion of it. I understand that. But we still can make a rational decision that's not based totally on emotion, and that's the way I try to advise my clients to look at those issues. But you have to live within the structure that's in front of you. And to me, that reduces that level of animosity. You know, if a developer is angry about a particular ordinance requirement, my planning staff and I can look them in the eye and say, look, that's what it is. And it was probably enacted by a council 2 councils ago, and maybe before the planner was in their seat. And I didn't vote, you know. So there's a way for us to do that. I understand for the development community, they maybe look at this thing differently, and I appreciate that. But we're all living within a structure we have to work within, right? And to me, that takes a lot of that emotion out of it.
So here's what I want to say to add to what these good gentlemen have said. First of all, if you need proof that there's animosity, look up that article on KSL that we talked about at the beginning. I wasn't there, so I could only go with what the article said, but judging from the article, that entire fiasco was an animosity thing. I view it as local government and developers are like an old married couple. An old couple that have to work together, but bicker all the time. And when an old married couple bickers all the time, often the reason is because there's just so much tension already in their marriage that they're just watching the other one, waiting for the other one to just do the slightest thing that offends them and start a fight. Just like, oh, you brushed your teeth and left speckles of toothpaste on the mirror again. They're just like that. And I see that a lot. I see a lot of developers doing that. I have a lot of developers who talk to me and say, those scuzzbags at the whatever city are just lying to me, and they're just full of everything, and, you know, they just said one thing, or they made one mistake, or something like that. And it goes the other way, because you're just watching so closely for someone to do something to slip up, so that you can be offended, so that you can be angry, so that you can punish them. And we need to not do that. We need, on both sides, we need to be able to look at each other and say, you're my partner. We're trying to accomplish something here. Let's make it good. Let's work together. That tension is not necessarily unhealthy as long as it doesn't turn into animosity.
I've been married 37 years, and my marriage isn't like that. Just
Very
You
good.
haven't been married long enough. All right, are we ready to move on? Just to let you know, timing-wise, about 3 o'clock, we're going to be taking a break. Is that right, Craig? So we've got about 20 minutes till the break time. We still have 2 other categories to go.
We're going to switch to another category.
We'll do it
So
after
let's
the
get one
break?
Let's get one more out of this.
Okay, let's do one more out of this one. We have a raised hand over here. Is planning staff the gatekeepers? All right. Who wants to tackle that one?
Your planning staff.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's so gatekeepers of? Yeah, what does that mean, Brent?
I'll tell you what I think it means, okay? I think there are some planning staff who think it's their job to say no. I think there's some planning staff that think it's their job to keep things out of the city council's hair when they know the city council are not going to like it. I think there are some planning staff in the state who feel like it's their job actually when somebody comes to find a way to say yes. That's what I mean.
All right, given that from a planning staff standpoint, this is my philosophy. I know not everybody had this philosophy, but I pretty much felt like the public had a right, the property owners had a right to ask for whatever they wanted to ask for. And then they had a right to get a decision from the appropriate decision makers. So when we would get an application, and we would look at it as staff sometimes and say, this is never going to fly. It's not going to go anywhere. Well, was it our right to tell them no? No, it wasn't our right. It was, we could advise them. We could say, look, you know, you go forward with this application. This is likely what's going to happen. But, you know, you want to pursue it, you can. And so then we would work all of the processes and do the reports and the work and everything that was required of us to do. But we really felt like we did not have the ability or the right at all, really, to tell somebody, no, you can't do that, and keep it out of the planning commissions and the council's hair. That was their job and their responsibility. Our responsibility as staff was to help people through the process and then help the decision makers to make the appropriate or the decisions according to the processes as they were.
I always like my planning staff to be really candid and frank with a property owner, a developer, somebody's bringing a project. I like them if they're asking for a zone change, which is a discretionary decision with the council, to say, we think this won't work and this is why, or we think you may get an approval on this, this is why. I like them to be honest. And I do think there's a gatekeeper function with your planning staff. I think they have an obligation to make sure that applications are complete and that they're presented in ways that make the decision process efficient for our decision makers. I think that's important. So is there a gatekeeper function in that respect? Maybe, yeah. But our staffs are not the ultimate decision makers very often. They aren't. Now, can they make a big difference in the way an application is presented? Yeah, they absolutely can, and frequently do. And so I always try to make sure they understand their obligation is to present the application fully and fairly and make sure our decision makers have all the information they should have. Is that a gatekeeping function? I don't know. I guess maybe. We know applicants have an absolute right to a decision on an application they bring to a city. However bad it may be, they can push that to a decision if they want to. I think in the right environment, our planning staffs are helping applicants to understand what their application is asking for, to see it in the appropriate light, and giving them the chance to make the right decisions they want to make.
I agree with that, and they should definitely have a gatekeeper mentality as far as, what you're saying is not compliant, stuff like that. But there are certain planners that we in the development community know that if we talk to, we're going to get a no. No matter what happened. They're not going to work with us to try to make it work. But a follow-up question to what you just said I wanted to ask is, a lot of Most places, I think, do staff reports, and when they do the staff report, the staff makes a recommendation. Some places don't, though. Some places, the staff report has been prohibited from making a recommendation. Do you have any thoughts on that? What's the better way to do it?
Well, as Brent just points that out, let me just preface that a little bit. I mean, staff can be empowered to make some decisions.
Sure.
On administrative decisions. It can actually say in your code or your ordinance, this staff person, the community development director, the zoning administrator, he or she makes the decision on a land use, on a conditional use permit application or on a subdivision application. Actually, that's not quite right. We have to take those through. But there are certain things that can be given to the staff level. It's really the legislative ones that are a little bit more nuanced, and this goes to what Brent is talking about, I think, because staff may, and wherever I've worked, usually does make a recommendation to the Planning Commission and to the council, saying, you know, we recommend based on what the plan says, based on the character of the development, based on a number of things, whether it ought to be approved or not. That's not the ultimate decision, but it can oftentimes carry an awful lot of weight with those decision makers. So it's really kind of, it's almost uncomfortable to work with a person who's come in and they're wanting something and you tell them, yeah, well, I'm going to recommend against it. Yeah. And then that person says, oh man, you know, you dirty bugger. Anyway.
Yeah. Just, you can actually make staff level subdivision decisions too, just to be sure about that. I guess on the staff report recommendation, this might be a little bit parasitical, but it depends for me on my city. It depends on, I guess, the sophistication of the staff to some extent. It depends on the engagement of my council to some level. I can think of 2 clients now who I would say they would function just fine without a recommendation from staff. I can think of 1 client who I would say, I want my staff to make a recommendation to that council. So it maybe depends a little bit.
Doesn't it send a message to the staff, we don't care what you think?
Tell me what you mean by that.
What I mean is that.
Like if they ask them not to make a
Yeah,
recommendation?
They tell the staff, don't make a recommendation, just tell me the facts. Because you're a professional, but we don't care what you think.
Lay out the options, but don't tell us which one you prefer.
Sometimes not even that, but yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would view it that way, but I guess it's possible. I just wouldn't see it that way, I guess.
So I want to just speak in favor of planners a little bit. One of the issues that planners have to deal with is they get all kinds of different levels of sophistication when applicants come in the door with an application. Some developers are sophisticated and have everything done. They're familiar with the city's ordinances. Other people are homeowners or other people that are less sophisticated, and the planners have to help the applicant understand the ordinance. Each city may have a different ordinance with respect to different kinds of development, and it's not easy to get familiar with all that. A developer that's done work in a particular city 2 or 3 times will learn that, but planners have to do that, and that's not necessarily weighing in on the application. That's kind of telling you that, look, your application doesn't meet the ordinance, and if it doesn't meet the ordinance, it's not going to go through. So let's see what we can do to help you comply with our ordinance.
Yeah, it's those decisions that are a little bit more discretionary, I think, that sometimes get tough. And I'll tell you, in my position and all the times that I've been a planner, there were times when I would look at an application and I would go one of 2 things sometimes, occasionally. I would say, A, oh man, I don't want to make a recommendation on this, because I know whatever recommendation I make, somebody's going to be really mad at me and at our staff. And so that would be tough. But the other, of course, is maybe there's not a clear answer. And you just go, well, you could do this and this, or you could do this and this. Really depends on what you want to do. And as a planner, I may not have a really strong feeling about either one.
Just dovetailing off what the mayor said, I'm the city planner for Farmington, Dave Peterson, but they are developers that are much more willing to try new things and do different things than other developers too at the same time. And number 2, UDOT has people that we know they're going to say no every time.
Amen. No, he's not wrong.
There's a lot of, possibility for good or bad in sort of the gray area. Not morally, but in terms of, there's a lot of reading between the lines in ordinances that needs to be done, and that particularly relates to process. So specifically, like state law says that, once an application is complete, that it needs to be moved forward and go through the process. But I think one thing that probably the legislature or many don't understand is how many incomplete applications are submitted to cities, and how much good graces are shown to developers in that situation by, instead of flat out recommending denial, just recommending a cure for the situation. Like, you're missing this piece of information, we'll take it forward because we don't believe it's essential, and we'll make a recommendation that it be taken care of. So in one specific example, I had an application come in probably about 18 months ago, and what happened was we were actually at a point where we felt that we needed to recommend denial on it. But what we did instead was said, it's your decision, Planning Commission, so we would recommend you do one of two things. Either you deny it or you resolve these issues. There's this insufficient information on these, and so take care of that issue. And then we did give recommendations on other issues, but the point was it's not, you can take one of two paths, but it's not responsible to go down this one path without more information. And so I guess my point is, one thing that gets lost in the discussion is how much the gatekeeping, or you could call it shepherding function, assists the developers in having a successful project. So.
Yeah, I like that term, shepherding. That I really think that's the role of staff, is to help shepherd some of these applications through the process.
If it makes you feel any better, Brandon, we had a discussion about complete applications this morning. We did. So what you're saying is right on topic. But whoever over here that grunted out "not all cities," that's also true, right? And that's part of the question about the gatekeeper situation, right? Is it your job to just stamp denied on an incomplete application? Is it your job to shepherd? Is it your job to help get that done? I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule to whether to answer that question, but there's other ways to do it.
I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule either, and I think we see really, really wide disparity in the way they treat a lack of information in applications between your really, really high growth communities to your smaller cities, and sometimes that's not the determining factor. Sometimes it's a disposition of staff or a disposition of elected officials also. I'm going to lift the curtain a little bit, and I hope none of the city attorneys in the room get mad at me when I do this, but I very, very rarely advise a client that they should deny an application. I am almost always advising my client, you should find a way to recommend approval of this application with all the conditions that you think need to be met to make it work, right? And frequently we've got a situation where a developer thinks they can't live with a particular condition, and they've been vocal about it and they've said it. And in that circumstance, I'm a lot of times still advising my client, I think you should approve this application with this set of conditions. We know the developer doesn't think they can live with this condition, but approve it with that set of conditions. There's a lot of reasons I do that, but one of the reasons I do it is because I like defending an approval with conditions a lot better than I like defending a denial.
That lets us decide,
Yeah.
lets us decide whether to go forward.
All right, we have time for maybe one more. Another category? Aha, minimum home sizes. Any of you gentlemen want to take that on?
I've never advised a client that they should go there. I think it's really, really hard to, and I'm not saying I don't think it could be legally defended, but I think it reaches outside of the clear boundaries of our authority. And so I've been reluctant to recommend to any client that they can require a minimum home size. I would say that issue is in sharper focus now than it's ever been. And my advice on that issue now would be maybe stronger than it's ever been. I would not advise a client to proceed that way.
So I'm gonna say, in my opinion, legally, you probably can. I think it's a tremendously bad idea. I think it's bad planning, but what's worse is, you know, I hear local governments complain about what the state does to them all the time. And the reason why the state does stuff to them is because they hear stories. And the reason why they hear stories is because developers go up there and say, so-and-so put this unbelievably undoable minimum home size when we're trying to create more affordable homes. And then the state acts. So, I mean, that's not the main reason why you shouldn't do it. I think it's generally bad planning. At least, you know, in some zones, you know, it might be okay, but I think it's counterproductive, frankly.
I have seen communities, a number of communities actually, that have had minimum square footage for homes. It's always been controversial because somebody wants to build a home that doesn't meet that, and they're really, you know, really saying, how can you deny me that I want to build a house that's maybe a couple hundred square feet shorter than what you're saying here? And, you know, if really pressed, I think it would be tough to defend. We do have a limitation in the state code now that for single-family and two-family dwellings, we cannot impose design requirements. Some people would argue that setting a minimum square footage is a design requirement. It doesn't say that explicitly in the code, but it hasn't been argued either whether that really
Cam
is.
has something to say.
Oh, it does say that. There we go. Okay. I thought it's, but yeah, okay. Thanks, Cam. So we do have something in the state code on that. And my guess is
Yeah,
we're,
tell them what Cam said. They couldn't hear what Cam said.
Cam said that they're, repeat it, Cam.
No, you have to repeat it.
I,
You have the mic, but 1,000 square feet.
yeah, okay. That's okay. In the state code, it does say that for single-family and two-family dwellings, you cannot require a minimum square footage larger than 1,000 square feet without a garage. So that is in the state code. And so, you know, that's something we need to, I mean, a lot of that was brought about because of the housing affordability issue too, but I think also because of some of the concern that people have had in some of the communities where those standards have been imposed.
We are going to take a break right now for 10 minutes. We're going to come back here at 6 minutes after the hour, and we're going to move on to developer myths.
Let me take just a second and invite you to sign up for continuing education credits if you're here in the room, if you have not done so already. And if you're at home and listening to this and would like credit as a realtor or as an attorney, you probably will have already sent an email to info@utahlanduse.org. That came in the message you got about the signing information. So please make sure you respect that, and we want to give credit where credit is due, but them's the rules according to the real estate division. Thanks for being here. Please enjoy a break.